Installing a Linux server is going to place you in some very good company. The biggest install base for Red Hat Linux is the United States military. Netflix uses Linux, and a very close cousin of it, BSD, FreeBSD. Most of the servers, internet servers, are all Linux based. The top 500 supercomputers in the world are all 100% Linux operating based, and most of the companies in the world that have really large annual turnovers and incomes, they run Linux. They trust Linux because of its stability and security. Microsoft has got their own Linux distribution now. It's called Mix, MIUX. In fact, Microsoft's Azure cloud services, they actually all run on Linux. So Linux is definitely the most used server operating system in the world. When it comes to Linux servers, it is not good to install what is called a rolling release. What a rolling release does for you is, as the latest version of software comes out, very soon after that it is available in your software repositories and you can use it on your Linux desktop, for instance. Now, when it comes to servers, rolling releases are not necessarily a good thing. Having the latest is not a good thing. Now, when I say the latest is not referring to your security patches and so forth, but rather versions of programs. So let's say, for instance, a new version of GIMP comes out, which you will be using on a desktop, for instance. You might want the very latest version as soon as possible. Or Blender, for instance, to do ray tracing. You might want the very latest version, and that's fine. Then you use that on a desktop that supports rolling releases. But there are also what is called point releases, and these are releases that come out less often. Now, this is what you actually want to use on a server. Now, when these releases actually come out depends on the particular distribution. For instance, Debian, which we're going to be looking at today, doesn't release very often, but when they do release, it has been thoroughly tested and it's very stable. Then you get Ubuntu, which we're going to be looking at today as well, releases far more often than Debian, but is also not as bleeding edge as, say, a rolling release like Arch would be. So it is also considered fairly stable. But like I say, this is just for applications itself. This does not include security patches. When you've got a server, you want security patches to be installed as soon as they're released. And on all the server distributions, these security patches come out quite often. So we'll jump over here to the Ubuntu's website. And if we want to download it here, we'll come to download up top here, and we'll choose. Now, this is where you can choose. You've got Ubuntu Desktop, Ubuntu Server, Ubuntu IoT, and Cloud. Now, obviously, on your particular use case, you don't need to install Ubuntu Server, which we're going to be installing today. Maybe you want Ubuntu for IoT. But this video is assuming that you want to install a stock standard Ubuntu server. This will work for most situations. You know, you might want to run a Nextcloud server, you might want to run a mail server, web servers using Apache or Nginx, database servers, file servers. All of that you can run on Ubuntu server. You can also install Kubernetes, and by default Ubuntu server will install your Linux clusters, not your Linux clusters, Linux containers. It'll have LXC as well as LXD. And alright, so let's click on Get Ubuntu Server here, and it's going to give you some options of how to do the download. We'll take option 2 here for manual server installation. Alright, so we click on that, and he starts the download. And if we come up here, alright, so yeah, it tries to do the download. Now, I have, like I said, I've already done the download. I'm not going to do it again. So let's assume that's been downloaded. Now, the other one we're going to be looking at today is Debian. Now, Debian is sort of one of the granddaddies of Linux. Another granddaddy is OpenSUSE, as well as Red Hat. They've all been around since the 90s. Some of the others have not been around so long. Slack has been around for a long time. Gentoo has been around for a long time, but they should not be used for servers. I would really say on servers, try and stick to distributions that are firstly not rolling releases, but point releases, and that support the RPM or the DBM package managers. All right. So you would be looking at, for instance, Red Hat, but Red Hat is a paid for distribution. You don't actually pay for Linux itself, but you are paying for support. But Red Hat is great. If you don't want to pay for Red Hat though, you have an option with Oracle Linux, which is basically Red Hat, just completely free. But we're going to be sticking today with the two most popular ones, Ubuntu and Debian. So if you come to the Debian website, here it says boldly download, so we click on the download and it'll take us to the download, and this I've also downloaded already, so I'm not going to be doing that. I'm going to be showing you these installations in VirtualBox. So if I come over to VirtualBox here, we're going to start with Ubuntu and then move over to Debian. Both of them should be reasonably quick. What I did do with the Ubuntu server and the Debian servers, I gave it 2 gig of RAM. Now this is the other thing when you're installing a server version, where if you take Windows servers for instance, you typically get, as part of the install, you get the entire GUI front end as well, which is fairly heavy. Now with servers, especially in the Linux world, you're not really interested in a pretty GUI front end. You do things via the terminal using SSH. Having a lot of RAM just so that you can cover your GUI is completely unnecessary. Your video RAM and so forth, for instance, in VirtualBox, you find with the normal 16 meg or something, you're not going to be doing any graphical stuff. So you're not going to have that overhead at all. So let's start it up. Now I must say I'm doing it in a VirtualBox, but I do have all these distributions running in on real servers. So what I'm going to do is just maximize this and let this run. Okay, and there we start. So it's asking you which language do you want to install, and we just press enter. We're happy with English. I'm going to use English UK just because I'm in South Africa and UK is closest to us, so not dictionary wise, not geographically. The keyboard I'm going to keep on US. I think you do have a South African option, yeah? Yes, you do have a South African option, but US, okay, we'll use South Africa. But US works fine for South Africa as well. So we're done on that, it's applying it. All right, so now it's trying to connect to our network. Now in VirtualBox, I did say that this is, we must use bridge networking. You can use NAT, but I've currently used bridge. The reason why I'm using bridge is so that from my host machine, I can SSH into the virtual machine without having to use the VirtualBox graphic environment itself, just logging in separately. But to do the installation, you cannot do that over SSH. Okay, so this is the other very important thing. If you don't actually have access to the hardware yourself, so you can't stick a USB into the computer or a CD-ROM or whatever, maybe you're doing this through some hosted service, then your service provider is going to do this installation for you. Now one thing that you must ask them is, you'd like LVM to be installed. We're going to cover that in a moment. LVM must be installed. You would like a boot partition of not less than 1 gig. 512 is fine. In fact, even smaller is fine, but 512, let's say a minimum of 512. It just causes a few headaches down the line, one day, and you've got to figure out how to clear things, and 1 gig is great, all right? And then you've got a choice of your file system. It's typically ext4, but you have got options, and we're going to look at this, or I'm just going to mention this just now again. So this is what you're going to have to tell your service provider if you're not doing installation yourself. But there, so we see that DHCP has figured out what my IP address is, and we just press enter, and I'm not using a proxy server, so I just press enter, and it's asking me what the mirror address is. Now the mirror address is where your Ubuntu installation is going to download packages from and security patches from and so forth. Now it's going to try and detect the one closest to you. So I'm in South Africa, so it's picked up a South African server. If you're somewhere else in the world, it'll pick up a different server. All right, press enter on that. Now here we come to the LVM option. LVM is, it stands for Logical Volume Manager. Which means it does logical volume management. Now logical volume management is a way of using multiple different physical hard drives and SSDs as if they were a single one. If you use LVM and you set up your system and you start running out of RAM, hard drive space, and you need to add another hard drive, With LVM, you can add that, and it's going to be completely transparent to Linux itself. It does not know you've added a physical new drive. It just knows, oh, I've got an extra, 4 terabytes available, or whatever the case may be. So you don't actually have to do any mounts or anything like that. Now, it's asking here, encrypt the LVM group with LUKS. Now, this could be an option for you if you want to encrypt your entire hard drive. If you, for instance, have a laptop, then I would recommend you do the encryption. But on most servers, it's not really necessary. But it will be necessary if there's a chance that somebody is going to steal your entire server. They could boot up from a different different distribution of Linux, or even the same distribution from USB, and access the drive and look at data and so forth. You can encrypt your entire drive using LUKS, and that would be a good thing to do. You can also just encrypt the home folders, but you choose. Alright, you can do a custom storage layout here. We'll just quickly go in there just to have a look and what our options are. It chooses here our first hard drive, and I'd like to go and see what we've got on it. Add a GPT format. If we come down here to format, this is where you now can choose your file systems and the likes. Now, okay, I was going to say that there's basically 3 options you should look at, and those are the ones that Ubuntu supports. So it's ext4, XFS, and btrfs. Now, the default on many installations is ext4. ext4 has been around many years. It's stable, it's fast, and there's nothing really wrong with it. btrfs, for instance, is on paper ever so slightly slower than ext4, but it does do better journaling, and it's slightly more capable of recovering files if things go wrong, or bad sectors and so forth. And XFS takes that even a step further. So XFS is great for servers, btrfs is great for servers, ext4 is also good for servers. It's a standard used for many, many years, but if you're not sure which one to use, I would definitely say the 3 you should be looking at are these 3, ext4, XFS, btrfs, and go and read up on them. And but if at this point in time, if you're not really sure what you want, just choose ext4. If you didn't come this far into the menu and you just said, let Ubuntu do the installation itself, and others we get to this point, and you didn't go into custom storage, then Ubuntu is going to install ext4 for you. So let's just accept the defaults, they are fine. And it's going to ask us, are we sure about all of this? And you'll notice here that it says the amount is, I can't move my mouse here, so I can't really show you, but the second line from the bottom here, partition 2, is mounted at boot, and you'll see there that it's 1 gig in size, which is good. We want 1 gig. Alright. There's another thing that is of interest, and that is swap drives, which if you have an extra separate hard drive or SSD, put the swap drive on a separate SSD for speed reasons. But it's a separate swap partition is not a must. You can nowadays create swap files in Linux, so you don't have to have your own partition. So let's say done on that, and selecting continue will begin the installation. Yes, we're happy, and we say start. Alright, so now it's going to ask your name, so you can type in whatever you want here, and I just put in my full name. That's what it actually expects, and then your server's name, whatever you want to call it. Maybe you've got your own domain. Let's say your domain is my super server. Well, you'll type out my super server here. This is not your .com domain, your .com full name. You can use it, but this is just your server's name. So I'm just going to say Ubuntu LTS. Where are we? Ubuntu LTS. All right. Then my username, when I log into the system, I'm just going to make it nice and short, Dean. And and then your password, just my normal short password. We should make this password very strong. All right, very, very, very strong. Now this is not the root password. Okay, this is the first user's password. So let's go to done. We're okay with that. Now you need to install the OpenSSH server. So we press the spacebar here to select OpenSSH server. Now this is necessary if you're going to do remote administration to your server, which you are most likely going to be doing. Alright, import SSH identities. We don't have other identities. We'll just leave that as done. allow password authentication over SSH. Now, okay, so this is something you can change at a later stage where it says allow password authentication. You can do it at this point if you have other identities to be able to pull in here, which we don't at the moment. But down the line, it's better to disable password authentication over SSH and just to use SSH keys. All right, we say done. Here's some software that you can install that, as far as I know, these are all snap packages. Yes, featured server snaps. So there's a Nextcloud server, for instance, that you can install. You can decide, I'm not the biggest fan of snap packages. One reason why you might not want to use snap packages, let's say you've want to install Nextcloud. If you're doing a Nextcloud install, but this server is actually a general web server. That means you're going to have a snap package running a little server inside of it, plus you're going to have your external Apache or Nginx server, Nginx server. It's up to you if you want to do that. I prefer not to, and I know a lot of other administrators prefer rather not to have snap packages installed like this. Prometheus here is something to monitor your server with from a web browser. If this is going to be a long-term server that you're going to be using, and you really want to do things right from scratch, I wouldn't install Prometheus at this point. I'd rather first learn more about Linux servers and so forth, and look at the other options other than Prometheus. There are many other options. So this is assuming this is a real server that you're going to install. We don't want to make any mistakes up front now and install extra things which we actually don't need or are going to want to delete one day because we've actually outgrown them. So alright, so we're done on that, and it's starting the installation, and we'll let the installation go through, and once it's finished I'll continue with it. Okay, so it's still saying you're downloading and installing security updates, but is giving us the option to reboot. So I'm going to do that now and reboot. Okay, so it'll start up Ubuntu here. Now, up to this point, you either did the installation yourself, as we just did it now, or your service provider would have done it up to this point. All right, so it's booting up here. Okay, so it's ready. We can log in now. It's still busy doing things in the background, loading a few things on Surface. We might see messages pop up suddenly here. Okay, so we created our user, and I called the user Dean. Oops, like I said, my ridiculously easy password. There's an example there, listening on socket. That's a background message that's still busy popping up. It's still busy loading things in the back. Let's see, we logged in, and it tells us there are still 15 upgrades that can be installed, and there's still many things loading in the background here, writing to the terminal. Alright, so I don't want to work inside this virtual machine. Let's pretend now that this virtual machine is actually a real installation somewhere, wherever you did the install, wherever your service provider is or your own server is. So the way to connect to that machine is using SSH if you want to do administration on it. I mean, there are other things, but don't even bother looking at them. Just stick to SSH. Everyone in the world uses SSH. Stick to SSH. That's how we do things in the Linux world. It's terminal, but it's easier that way and far more powerful. Alright, so in Ubuntu here, you don't really see a prompt or anything. It's because these background messages were still loading. It's a little bit ugly, not quite sure what's happening here, but lost at this point. But you are logged in, and you can now do whatever you want to do. So the first thing, it did tell us that there are still upgrades for us. In order to use or to install upgrades, we use apt, all right, the command apt, or the package apt, and you've got to run it as a super user. So we type in sudo. All right, now when we installed Ubuntu, it asks us the user and so forth. That user is the super user. He's not root, but he belongs to the sudo group. And on some distributions, it's called wheel. But on the Debian based stuff and many of the others, it's just sudo. So if you want to run apt to do an upgrade or whatever, you say sudo apt. And first we do an update. And that's saying retrieve the latest package list for us from the servers, so we can see what do we actually need to upgrade. So now this is your password again, because you are now doing something as sudo, so as a super user, all right, and therefore security is a must. So it asks you your password. So it's downloading everything, it's checking for us, and it's telling us 15 packages can be upgraded, and you can see there, run apt list upgradable to see a list of things, but I'm just going to install all of them. So it's sudo apt upgrade. Now say update is to get a list and compare to see what can be upgraded, and then when you say upgrade, it does the actual upgrade for you. You don't have to type sudo again, alright? Well, you have to type sudo again, but you don't have to type your password again, because the terminal remembers, or sudo remembers what your last password was, and it gives you a few minutes grace. I can't remember how long, maybe 10 minutes or so. So you don't have to retype your password. But the moment you close this terminal and you go to a different terminal, then you have to retype it again in those 10 minutes. So now he's asking us, he's going to do this download. It's going to cost only 114K of additional disk space, and do you want to continue? So you'll see there that the YN for yes, no, if you want to continue. The Y is capitals and the N is lowercase. The capital means it's the default. So if you don't physically type a Y or N and press enter, if you just press enter, then that capital Y, which is the default, is going to be assumed and the upgrade is going to continue. So I'll just press enter and it goes ahead and it does the upgrade. A few things to mention while this is running in the background and doing the upgrade. So if you are working with Linux servers and you need to do remote administration, which you are going to be doing, especially in the beginning stages, quite a lot, so you'll be using a utility called SSH. Now SSH on a server, when first installed, by default runs on port 22. We don't want to stay on port 22 because everyone in the world knows that the default for Linux servers is to run on port 22. So I would suggest changing it to somewhere between 10,000 and 50,000. Being you can go up to 2 to the power 16, which is 65,000 approximately. But I wouldn't be within 10,000 from either side, because hackers can hit those quite easily. So give yourself a range in the 10 to 50,000 and just choose a number, a random number in between. Don't choose one dead in the middle, because that's also one to go for, but for hackers. So choose something, somewhere between 10 and 30, or 10 and 25, and 35 and 50,000, around there. Then once you've changed that port, I'm going to show you how to do it now. Once you've changed that port, we can create a Ed25519 SSH key. So if you've got SSH keys, you don't need to type in passwords when you're connecting to servers to do administration. And then that also means we can disable password logins via SSH. So if I wanted to log in to my remote server, so my username will be Dean, and my password will be my normal password that I typed in just now when I did a login. We actually don't want to do that. We want to use SSH keys to log in with. So the only way someone can get into the system then is if they steal my SSH key. So they physically got to get onto my machine, okay, in South Africa, hack me here and get my private key, and and then put it on their computer and then try and log in. And it's not going to happen, okay? But just be aware that when it comes to security with SSH keys, that's what hackers are after. They are trying to get your public and private keys. So, okay, disable password logins when you feel comfortable. Yes, this is what I was saying now. So initially, make your password quite difficult and don't disable it yet, all right? Enable the SSH logins with the keys, SSH keys. Like I say, recommended is Ed25519. You can do RSA, etc. But I would say stay with Ed25519. It's very strong. And then once you know how to use your system, you're quite comfortable with using it, you've done some reading up on Linux and so forth, then go ahead and disable your password login and only use your keys. The other thing then is, if you are wanting to copy stuff between your server and your local machine in either direction, from server to your local machine, or let's say you're sitting on your local machine like we are doing now, and we want to transfer something to the server. So you can type out either SCP or rsync, all right, and it'll connect to the server and copy your file over from your local machine to there. So basically, to do a remote administration, you need to know how to use SSHD. You need to change your SSHD port from 22 to something. Create yourself a key using SSH keygen, and which is a SSH utility. Then once you're ready, disable your password logins, and to do file copies, learn to use SCP and or rsync. Rsync can be used, for instance, only to copy files over if there's actually been changes and so forth, where SCP just copies, like normal CP for copy. But now SCP being using secure copy, using SSH, the channel to do your copy. Then you can also set up your firewall, or not can, you must set up your firewall. Now remember, you've just changed your SSH port from 22 to something. So your firewall must be set up to allow access to this new port from external. And then all the other ports, other than the ones that you actually want running. So let's say, for instance, you're running a mail server. You might want to have your port 25 open to the outside world. 110 you want. 587 you want. 143 you want for mail servers. If you're running, for instance, MySQL or MariaDB, it'll be 3306. But so only open up the ports that you actually have to. Having a web server with your clients running on it and having access to a database, let's say MongoDB or MariaDB, they do not necessarily need access to that server from the outside world. Their websites are running, and let's say they're using PHP as a backend. That's actually running on the server. So it can connect to MongoDB or MariaDB directly on the local server. It doesn't have to have access via the internet. So you don't have to open up the ports for MariaDB, MySQL, MongoDB, and so forth. Just something to bear in mind. So always try and open as few as possible ports on your server. Gives hackers less to attack. Something else I'll just throw out there, you can look at something called knockd, as a knock on the door, K-N-O-C-K-D. You can read up on that. You can read up on ClamAV, virus protection. Alright, so that was the firewalls. Now we've already looked at if you want to do an apt update and an apt upgrade. But let's say you want to install something. Let's say, like I say, you're running a web server and you want to use Apache or Nginx. You'll say sudo apt install Apache 2. Then you've got sudo apt remove. So let's say you're unhappy with something you installed, you no longer need it, you can remove it. Now when you remove it, the config files are going to remain behind. So if you ever reinstall it again, the config files are already set up. If you say purge, then it gets rid of the config files as well. So purge is a far cleaner remove of a package than just remove. So preferably use purge, unless for a reason you want to leave config files behind and so forth. And okay, we'll get to useful knowledge just now. So if I just, if we come onto our server here, I'll just show you some examples. Alright, so it's done the updates and it hasn't told us that it needs to do a reboot. If you ever do need to reboot your server from the command line, you can say sudo reboot. Again, you have to say sudo because you have to have the rights to be able to reboot a server. You can't just reboot it willy-nilly. And we want to do it now. Sudo reboot now. Don't do a shutdown. Don't say sudo shutdown, okay? Because then your server's turned off. Then you're going to have to ask the person, your service provider, whoever, to start your server up again. So don't do a shutdown ever. Just do a reboot. Okay. And he still remembers my password from just now, so I didn't have to type it in. So it's doing the reboot for us. There we're looking at VirtualBox, and yeah, Ubuntu starting up again. So, like I was saying, if this is our actual machine running somewhere in the cloud, and I'm going to minimize this and connect to it now using a terminal. But in order for that, I first got to find out what its IP address is. I did see it in the install, but I forgot what it is. So I'll show you how to find your IP. You just type out IP space -a, and it'll tell you what your IP address is. If you've got an IPv6 address, you use the same, and it'll also tell you IPv6 address. Another important point to remember is that Ubuntu and Debian uses something called systemd to start the system up and to manage services and daemons. Just something important to remember if you ever do installations. You might need the knowledge that you are using systemd. Okay, so we should be up now, and it's asking us for a login, but these messages appearing again here. It's just messages coming up from the back end. Alright, and then our password. I keep typing in the wrong place here. And our password. Alright, so we are fully updated. Our server is up and running, and it tells us we are on the kernel version 5.4. So like I was saying, if you want to, in fact, if in future, if your server's been running a while now and you can't see the startup messages here, and you can't see the kernel version, you can just type out uname -a or -r if you just want to see the kernel version. If you say -a, it'll give you a whole lot of information, and it's telling us that we are on kernel version 5.4 revision 65. Okay, so that's fairly new. I think the latest at the moment is 5.9 that you can get in rolling releases such as Arch. So that's actually fairly new for a non-rolling release. On Debian, it's older. I think it's 4.19. So the kernel is a bit behind on Debian there, but it is stable. So, and a lot of things doesn't require newer kernels. So you decide if you want it or not, if you need the newer one or not. Okay, so all right, so that's uname. So if you want to see our IP address, IP-A, and sorry, IPA, not -a, IPA, and it tells us our IP address is 192.168.0.107. Okay, so let's minimize this, and we'll open up a terminal, and I'm going to SSH into that server. So I want to log into that server as Dean. That's the user I created, and it is 192.168.0. I think it was 107. Oops, 107. All right. Now it's going to say, are you sure you want to connect to the server? Because this is the first time I'm connecting to the server. And I say yes. You can read up on this, but you should always be fine just the first time saying yes. But read up on this. There's a reason why it's asking you this. And okay, it's been added. Now it's asking me the password on this remote server of ours that we just installed. So that is my normal password on that server. And we are now logged into the server. And you can do anything you wanted to do on your server here. So if you want to install, let's say, Apache, sudo apt. Now remember, I've rebooted my machine in the meantime, so sudo is going to ask me for my username again. Okay, sudo apt install, and let's say we want to install Apache. Now I'm not quite sure how to spell it or whatever, so I say Apache, and I press tab twice, okay? And it'll start filling in for me the possible options. I'll tab again and I say, oh, which one do I want to install? So, all right, it's Apache 2 that I want to install. Now, you might want to install MariaDB as well. So it's MariaDB something. Press tab. Okay, so let's put a little dash there for us. Press tab again. Double tab. Okay, and we want to install the server component. So there we have it. So it's MariaDB server. So it'll install Apache and this MariaDB server for us. We can do PHP as well, so it's on 7 point something. So the latest one it's aware of is 7.4. I know 8 has been released, but it's not available in the Ubuntu repositories yet. If I press enter now, it will install all 3 of these packages. So press enter. It's going to ask me for my password, and it's going to tell me what it's going to install, how much extra disk space is required, and we can install it, and it'll be up and running. Now, I'm not showing you in this video how to install your software, just how to get your server up and running. Alright, so I think I can literally just kill this, and we can move over to, sorry, that's a terminal. So okay, so in a terminal, if I want to exit this connection now that I have with the server, I can either just type in exit and I'll be kicked out, but a shortcut you can use is, what sometimes works, is Control D. D for donkey. Okay, it'll kick you out and log you out. But we'll just do it the nice way now. We'll type exit, or if you type in WHO, it'll say, who's currently connected to the server. So it's a user Dean, and it tells you the IP address is from 106. Okay, and the server's IP address is 107. So it just tells you who's currently logged into the server. So if you ever wonder if someone's logged into your server, you can type out who, or you can even type out W. It'll give you all sorts of information of, logins and so forth. Oh, sorry, one more thing that we must cover. If we come here to, okay, so we looked at, okay, so it's the firewalls and some other useful knowledge. We looked at IPA, and so system logs, cat, nano, and so forth. All right, so, okay, we're going to be doing that again. So before I exit the server, okay, we got to check our SSHD port. Right, so we need to edit a file. Okay, it's a config file for SSH, and specific the daemon, And to do that, we can use nano. Vim might be installed if we're lucky. Yes, Vim is also installed, but Vim, if you're new to Linux and stuff, you might not know how to use Vim. It's maybe a little bit complex to start with, so let's not do Vim. We'll use nano. Now, the config file that we want to edit is locked for root access only, so it's protected, and that means we've got to run a sudo. So we're going to say sudo, then nano. Nano is a text editor. It's a command line text editor that you can get on Ubuntu and Debian and many other related distributions. So it is lying in the folder structure, etc, then it is ssh, sshd if I remember correctly, yeah, sshd config. You press enter on that and you'll see here it says port 22. Okay, so it's currently commented out, which means the default will be 22. If there's no port specified, it becomes 22. So if we take the comment out, then we're saying, yes, we want it to be 22. So even though we're making it the same as the default now, so it's kind of silly, but so we want to change that to a bigger number. So let's say we want to make just some random number, 36,000, what's that? Let's make it 33,500, what, 33651. 33,651 is our new SSHD port. All right. So Control S to save it, and then Control X to exit. Okay. Now the server is currently still running on port 22, the SSHD server. We need to change that now. We need to restart SSHD. So in order to do that, you do sudo again. Some people do say, just say su and then switch to root, and don't do that. All right. You can cause yourself problems down the line. Until you really know what's going on, don't just use su. Use sudo. All right. So we do sudo, and it is systemctl, and we want to say restart. So there's a okay. So let's look at our current service. So if we say status, and it's SSHD is the name of the SSH server. So we want to look at what's the current status. So it tells us that it's currently active and it's running. It is enabled. It will be loaded when the computer restarts, and it's currently, you'll see here, it's listing on port 22. When we do a restart of that server now, it's going to switch over to our new port. All right. So if we change the status to restart, all right, and now we do a status again, and now it tells us the port it's running on is 33651. So if we exit out of this terminal now, okay, and we try and connect to it again, all right, it cannot connect because port 22 is not the correct server port anymore. It's 33651. So you cannot connect to 22. So the hackers have now got to scan your whole system to try and find the SSH login port. So all right, we'll do that, and -b okay, so we tell them we want to connect to port 33651. We type in our password again, and we are connected, and all's good again. All right, so we looked at changing the SSHD port. We looked at how to use nano, and we looked at how to restart services. When you install services the first time around, let's say it's a service you wrote yourself, created yourself. It's not something that's installed with, like, say, MariaDB or MongoDB. So they do it all automatically for you. Then you're going to have to say sudo enable. What enable does is it says take your service and enable it to start when your system reboots. So okay, now SSHD is already enabled. So by whatever service you want, your own service or whatever, you'll put the name there and so forth. This is assuming you've now already registered your service. But you can read up on that. But you need to do enable and then a start, and then your service is up and running. Okay, so we don't want to get too difficult, too complex here. Just keep things easy, because just getting a server up and running is actually fairly easy in Linux. Okay, so we looked at IPA. All right, then we can look at the system logs. We've got cat, nano, and crontab. Okay. So the other thing is, let's say for instance we want to look at some logs that were generated by Linux itself, the kernel, itself, and many other things write to the same log file. If you've got Apache running, it writes to its log files. If you're using fail to ban, for instance, you can read up on that. Fail, the number 2T, not the word 2, the number 2. So in other words, fail to ban. You can go read up on that. That's something nice to use, which ties in with nogd. Okay, you can use that as well. But okay, so if we just want to look at our system logs, that is also restricted. Okay, so you have to be sudo to get to it. Now, because we logged out and logged back in, that means we're going to have to type in our password again. Good for security. So sudo, and we're going to say we want to look at our file. We're going to use the tail command. Okay, we want to follow it. So as changes are made, we want it to reflect on the screen. How many lines must appear on the screen initially? We're going to say, let's say 50 lines. And what is the name of the file? So that is varlog syslog. Okay, so it's going to ask us our password, and so there, those are the last 50 lines. Okay, it's gone off the screen there, but those are the last 50 lines of our system log. Now, this is a great place to monitor things like people trying to access ports that they don't have access to, and so forth. Every time somebody logs in, it'll be written to here. This is sort of the main log that you want to monitor on your server. And then obviously the individual application logs, like Apache's got its own logs, for instance, as well. So Control-C to get out of there again. You can read about the command jobs. Okay, it tells you if jobs are running in the background. And you can make jobs run in the background by executing a command and then saying Control-X, alternatively saying nano and then typing a single and sign, and that'll put things in the background. But you can go read up on that. Okay, so we want to look at the firewall. So if I type in UFW, uncomplicated firewall, all right? So that is the firewall that comes with Ubuntu. That's the front end. So you actually have something called netfilter in your Linux kernel. And on top of that, you typically have something like IP tables to manage netfilter. And then you've got UFW, which is even more in user space, more for the front end, easier to use to manage your firewall. So if I want to see what currently do we have, so status. Now, oops. Now watch what's going to happen here. Status. It's going to ask us, you must be root, all right? So you have to do sudo again, because we don't want normal users to see what's going on in the firewall. It's easier to hack things when the more information they've got. So we say sudo UFW status. Okay, and it tells us it's inactive. Okay, it's not currently running. This must be running on a server. Okay, firewall must be up and running. Well, okay, that's also a contentious issue. You can discuss that. You might not need it, but yes, just enable it. Okay, so we need to go and look at systemctl. Systemctl status. What is that called? Is it UFW? Status, sorry. Alright, so it tells us it is active. Okay, so what we have to do to get UFW running, so just to show you again, if I say status now, it tells us it's inactive. So we just say reloaded, not enabled, skipping reload. No, so that must be yes. So we want to enable it. Now at this point, remember you are connected remotely to this machine. So if you had any firewall settings inside there, it could kick you off at this stage. But since this is a new install, there is nothing inside it, so you're not going to be kicked off. So if we now say, if we look at the status, okay, so, okay, my mistake. I previously added this port, so let me just remove it again. Just remove them. Come on. So, okay, so our firewall is active, but there are no rules defined. So to add our SSH port, we just say enable or allow, sorry, and we allow it. Okay, so this is going to, you can only allow certain IP addresses to be able to connect to this port, but here we're just going to allow everything to connect to that port, and it's created two rules for us, the IPv4 and the IPv6 rule. We don't want the IPv6 rule, for instance, to be here, so we could say sudo, status and numbered, and it's, oh sorry, status is spelled wrong, status. Okay, so it tells us there's our two rules, number 1 and number 2. So I want to remove number 2, which is our IPv6 one. So we take 2 away. Oh, come on. Delete, not remove. I swear I've never done this before. Okay, so now we should have only one rule. Okay, yes, that's an IPv4 rule to allow connections to port 33651. And so that means our firewall is up and running, and we can now connect to the system externally from any machine in the world. We can, like I say, deny everyone and only allow a particular IP address, but do that later once you know how to do it and so forth. Just read up on UFW and it'll tell you how to do it. But you might have reasons to only allow certain IP addresses or allow all of them. Just find out what your reasons are and then act accordingly. All right, then we can look here at Crontab. Now, if I just type, okay, what Crontab does is it allows you to run predefined commands on a calendar. All right, so I think the minimum is once every minute that something can run, all the way through to, I think it's once a month, or like only every Tuesday of every month, or every second day, or at 12 o'clock every morning, or it's, you can set it up as you want. But there's a whole little syntax to it that you can read up on. So if I just type in crontab, okay, and then -e, all right, means I want to edit my current crontab file. Now, because I didn't type sudo in front of it, it's going to edit the crontab for the current user, which is Dean. If I type sudo in front of it, then it's going to edit the crontab for the root user, and anything it runs, okay, is going to run as root. So you decide at this point, do you need something to run as root, or is running as a user okay? Often running as a user is okay, and like, so, but you can choose that. Crontab is without the ch. Okay, so now it's going to ask you what editor you want to use. I want to use nano, so it's the easiest to say here. That's okay, number 1, and okay, from now on it'll always use nano. So if I Control X here, let's just see. Yeah, so it always uses nano from now on. Now, here's just the basic information of how it works, and you basically want to, underneath here, this is where you want to start typing in your calendar time when some event must trigger. Okay, so you can go and read up on how to use Crontab, but this is how you can kick off things to automatically fire. Maybe you want to do some backup at 2 o'clock every morning or whatever. You'll do everything inside Crontab here. All right, Control X here. No, I don't want to save anything. Okay. What is our other bit that we can look at here? So it's Crontab system. Okay, then we've got cat. Okay, so our last thing that we're going to be looking at is, let's say I want to list everything in my home folder. Now on Ubuntu, for instance, you can type in ll and it'll list everything for you. Some other distributions of Linux does not have ll. ll is actually just what is called an alias. I'll show you now how to do aliases. But you can then just type ls, all right, if you want to view. And what it'll do is it'll list everything that is not hidden. Now, everything in Linux that starts with a dot, all files that start with a dot are hidden. So if I want to say, show me everything, even the hidden stuff, so I'll say -a for everything or all, and it'll show them all in one line. But I want them listed, one underneath the other. Okay, so it's -al. And this is the command you'll probably most likely use most of the time if you don't have ll. Then we want to look at cat. Okay, now cat is concatenate. So what you want to do with cat, for instance, is to list the contents of a file. Now inside bash rc over here, okay, we've got aliases declared inside there. Bash history, for instance, contains everything we've typed so far in our bash shell. So we can say in Ubuntu, if you just type out history, I think Debian does this as well. It'll give you a list of all the last stuff you've typed. Alternatively, you can cat the file yourself. History is the command there, but if you cat it, that means like list all the contents of a particular file. So that was .bash underscore history. Sorry, underscore. Okay, so if I cat it, it'll show me the last stuff that I typed in there. Okay. Now, there's our bash rc file. This is quite an important file in which a lot of alias and so forth can be added. So I just said cat, so it just spits out the contents for me. But let's say I actually want to edit it. Then I don't use cat, but I say nano again. Now I don't have to say sudo in front of it because this is the file. Okay, let me show you. This is the file -al. So if we look at bash rc here, all right. So the owner is Dean and the group is Dean. So that means I got right access to that file. That's my personal copy of bash rc. Root has got their own version, and all other users will have their own versions as well. Right, so let's go back here and do a nano on it. Okay, pretty colors it kicks out for you. We go down to the bottom here, and like there's for instance an alias. You can type out alert and it'll kick out that command for you. Yes, LL's alias. Alright, so if you type LL, it actually does an ALF. LA does that. Alright, and say you can come and add your own aliases to this list. Aliases are your friend, you might do that a lot. Alright, so Control X out of that, and no saving. So that's the basics of getting your Ubuntu server up and running. And now I'm going to very quickly shoot over how to do your Debian server as well. Okay. And so I think I did show you already, but if we come to the Debian website, you click on download, it'll do the download file, ISO file for you. And I've already done it, and I just want to kill this, sorry. So what I want to do on this server now is I actually want to shut down Ubuntu entirely. Shut down now. Because it's using RAM at the moment on my virtual machine, and I don't want that. Now we have to type our password in because it's been a while since we typed our password in. We can't remember it anymore. So we do a shutdown, and it's going to shut down this server for us. Should be fairly quick. And if we come to, okay, it's gone. So that server has been shut down. And if we come here, we look at Debian, and I'm going to start it up. This is also, if I remember correctly, a 2 gig RAM machine. And let's just come and select Debian is not in the list here. So, alright, so we can do a Debian install in Virtualbox here and let that installation go. Alright, we don't want to do a graphical, well, you can choose, you can do a graphical install. Let's say you do a graphical install, okay. But again, remember at this point, it might actually be your service provider that's doing this installation, not you. And you can just request certain things like file system that must be used and so forth. So yes, we accept English, so you can use the mouse, okay, because we chose graphical install. I'm in South Africa, so I go to South Africa. American English, no. Oh, that's a keyboard. Yeah, American English is fine for the South African keyboard. Okay, it's looking for where it must do the install from. So in other words, it's detected the ISO file, installing from the ISO file. Debian install is not that fast. I have worked on much faster installs than Debian's. I'm not quite sure the reason for it, but that doesn't matter as long as it works at the end of the day. Okay, detecting everything. Okay, give it a name, like Ubuntu, I called it Ubuntu LTS. Yeah, the default is Debian. You can change it, accept it. I'm just going to accept it, enter it. Give it a domain name. I'm not part of a domain. I don't have an internet address. If you're putting this on the internet, then you could put, yeah, for instance, your domain name, mysupersecretdomain.com.co.za.nze, whatever the case may be. But I don't have one since I'm in a virtual machine here. Okay, configuring the network. Now it's asking me for the root password. Now this is a little bit different to what Ubuntu did just now. Okay, so in Debian it asks you for the root password. I'm going to type in my password here. Because in Ubuntu it disables root logins. Debian does not disable root logins as far as I know. A user account will be created for, okay, so this is now the same as we did in Ubuntu, my actual first user. So my non-root user. Okay, my username is Dean, and I'll give it my same password again that I used in Ubuntu. Don't forget your passwords, else you're locked out of your own machine. And never accidentally remove yourself from the sudo group. So if you ever do a command called change change mod, ch group, okay, and then you'll say -g and give it the new group name. Always make sure there's also a -a in front of it. So so it says keep your current groups and add you to the new group. Else you remove your groups, and if you're in the sudo group you can no longer log in or use sudo. Okay, use the entire disk with LVM. I'm going to use LVM again, okay, and here it gives you the option as well to encrypt your entire disk. You make this decision. A lot of you might want to encrypt. Alright, I'm not going to at this point in time. The problem with when you encrypt your hard drive is when you reboot your machine and you don't have actual access to that first login screen, it's going to ask you your password on that first screen. You will not see that on many distributions of Linux. You won't see that when you first start your computer up, because it does the decryption before it loads the operating system. So before SSHD is running, etc., it already needs to do that first encryption. So when you're running hosted somewhere, don't encrypt. You could encrypt your home folder. You can go read up on that. Use entire disk and setup. So let's just come look here at manual. Alright, so guided partition, manual. So we come here to our hard drive. You have selected yes. Okay, so here, I think it's here now. Create a new partition. Yes, that size, primary, and you can specify, oh yeah, there we go, the file system. So it's got a whole lot more options, but it's got the main one. So you've got your ext4, your btrfs, and your xfs. Okay, so Debian can also do them. You can specify a separate swap area then if you want. So Debian gives you a few options here, which is good. I'm just escaping back here. So let's just get back here to, sorry. Okay, so, alright, let's just get, I shouldn't have done any of this. Damn it. Okay, so Debian up and running here now. Doing the install, and I'm going to choose Graphical Install. Let's just get here. Do the Graphical Install. So Debian, the startup is a little bit slow, or the installation process. So yes, I'm English. You choose United States. I'm in South Africa. American English for the keyboard is fine. Press Enter. Or since you got a mouse pointer, you can move your mouse to the button and say continue. Okay, it's getting things ready for us. Okay, and so the network has been set up and is asking me for my host name. In Ubuntu, I called it Ubuntu LTS. Yeah, I'm just going to accept the default, come down to continue, click on that. Domain name, if you have a domain name, maybe it's mysuperserver.com, whatever the case may be. You'll type it in here. Me being in a virtual machine, I don't have one, but you can type in whatever. myserver.com, for instance. Continue. Okay, the root password. So make sure that this is an extremely strong password, not a short one like I'm typing in here now. Your full name. My logon username is Dean, yes, and then a password. Now the root password and this password should not be the same password, ideally. It can be, but preferably should not be. Okay, setting things up here. So we do have the option to use LVM, which is good. With hosted machines, that's good. So you can always add hard drives and so forth. And you can also do it encrypted. One thing about the encryption is the decryption happens, let's say you reboot the server. Before Sshd is running, before you can remotely log into the server, it's already going to ask you the password to decrypt the hard drive so that it can run the rest of the operating system and start up Sshd. So you're never going to see that initial password request to decrypt the hard drive. So if you're doing a installation on a server which you cannot see that initial screen for on a monitor somewhere, then do not encrypt the entire disk. You can encrypt your home folders, but do not do the entire disk. Just for interest's sake, I'm going to choose manual here. Just want to see the file systems that it has available for us. So we're going to do not guided. I'm going to choose that hard drive. We've only got the one hard drive available at 21 gig. You have selected an entire device. Create a new empty partition. Yes. Okay. So now we can choose what file system to use. So okay, so that was the hard drive we chose. It's creating this partition for us, and we can now format it. So we create a new partition, we say. We tell them what size we want. I'm going to just use the whole one for now. Okay. It's a primary partition. If you did partition tables and so forth using fdisk in the past, this should be ring a bell to you. Okay, use it as the ext4 journaling file system. If I enter on here, I've got different options. So we've got our ext4, we've got btrfs, we've got xfs, and we've got a whole lot of others. So we've got our swap one as well. So, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to accept the default. Let's say go back, and we go back again. So let's go back to guided partitioning. So, and we're going to say use entire disk and set up LVM. Press enter on that. That's the disk we want. All files in one partition, or okay. So yeah, you can separate things onto different partitions, which you could have then done onto different hard drives if you did it manually. But all right, separate home. Maybe just stick it all onto one. That's okay. Okay. Now just asking you, are you sure? And it's now going to write the partition stuff to hard drive. So we change it to yes and say yes, and it writes it to the hard drive or the SSD or whatever the case may be. And partition you may use the whole. Yes, we want to use everything for our volume. And press enter on that. Okay, finish partitioning and write changes to disk. We finished. We say continue. Hang on a second, what's that about? Oh, I thought we already did this. Okay, now it's doing the installation of Debian. It is a little bit slow, so I'm going to let it run. And, oh, it's a bit quicker than just now. Let's just see what happens here. Yeah, okay, so it's slowed down now. So Debian is always a bit slower on the install. Okay, I'll be back once we got something to see again. All right, so it's all right, so it's asking us now at this point if we have additional CDs. which we don't. We only downloaded one, so we just say we don't have any more and continue. Okay, configuring the packet manager, finding a local mirror. It picks up I'm South Africa, which is correct, and I have options here what to connect to. I'm just going to select the default. No proxy information. Okay, and now we have to answer this question about the popularity contest. This is, do you want to send some information through to the developers and so forth of Debian, telling them, you know, just some statistics about installations and so forth, what people go for. You can say yes or no here, depending on how you feel. I normally say no. I don't have anything against the Debian guys. I do trust them. I'm just somebody that normally says no to questions like these. And alright, so it's continuing the installation. It is quite a slow install, like I said, but it shouldn't be too long. Okay, so now at this point you can make the decision of either installing a graphical front end or sticking to using the terminal. Because this is a server, not a desktop system, we're not going to be installing a graphical front end at all. So we disable that Debian desktop environment, and we do enable SSH server. You can leave print server on if you are going to be using a print server. If you've got a web server, maybe you can switch it on, but I would normally just install these things by hand myself. So all I'm selecting here is SSH server and standard system utilities. Continue on that. Okay, so now it's got to install the bootloader. It's detected that it's the only installation on the computer, and do we want to install it as the master boot record? So we say yes and continue. This is for MBR, obviously, not UEFI. Install the grub. Okay, now select the drive. We only have the one drive on which to install the bootloader. You might have a 2 or 3 or 4, but we only have the one drive, SDA. We don't have a SDB, C, and so forth. So we select the one drive, SDA, and continue on that, and it's installing the bootloader for us. And there we have it. Debian installation is completed, and it's time to boot into your system, it says here. So let's click on continue, and let's see a restart. I'm going to just come up here and remove, it's already removed the device for me. And so this is our first boot into Debian. Okay, so yeah, we accept that default. So there we have Linux 4.19. So, but that's not necessarily a bad thing, as I was saying. So they spent some time hardening version 4.19, so you can rely on it. And we're ready to log in again into our fresh new system. So okay, now, so I want to see my current user. Because we set up a root user during the installation and gave it a password, I want to see what groups does my current user Dean belong to. And so he does not belong to a Sudo group. So what we need to do is we need to switch user to root. So we say SU is going to ask us for our root password, which is the one we did when we installed Debian. Alright, and then we say I want to see if sudo is actually available. So it is cat group, and yeah, okay, so there we do have sudo available. Alright, so I need to add Dean to the sudo group. I wonder if sudo is actually installed here. Yeah, see, sudo is not installed. Alright, so we have to install sudo first. The group might exist, but that doesn't mean that the command utility actually exists. So we're going to install sudo. Okay, so sudo has now been installed, but now I need to add the user Dean to the sudo group, and then he can use the sudo command line utility as well. Okay, so we need to log in again. And okay, so now we've installed sudo, but I'm not part of the sudo group, so I still need to add myself to the sudo group. So I can't, for instance, say sudo usermod -ag sudo dean. So I can't use sudo to add myself to the sudo group. Okay, so there it tells me I'm not in the sudo group, so I can't execute it. So what I need to do is go back to root and then do sudo, run the sudo utility and do a usermod on it and append the new group. So that -a is very important, as a by the way. You could lock yourself out of your machine if you forget to use -a. I've done it before. Sudo and then dean. Okay, so dean is now part of the sudo group. So I'll exit from root again, and I will what can I run a sudo? Well, let's just run groups. I should now be in the sudo group. I am not. Oh, I need to reboot. So okay, and let's do the reboot. Alright, and we log in again. And I am now in the sudo group, as you can see. So I can now use sudo. So from this point on, everything should basically be very similar to Ubuntu. So I want to see, do we have UFW installed? No, we don't. So let's install UFW. Okay, so UFW is installed. From what I remember, it is not loaded at this point in time. So if I do a system ctl status, now UFW should not be running. Yes, it's loaded, but it's dead. All right, so let's start it up. And let's look at the status again. And it's loaded and it's active. So now the exact same thing as what we did in Ubuntu just now. You can go ahead and change your Sshd port. So just as a reminder, let's just quickly I'll do a nano quickly on Sshd. Oops, always. Okay, Sshd. So same as in Ubuntu, yeah, you'll come and you'll change your port to whatever you want it to be, say 45123, and save that. And remember that then you're going to have to add it to your firewall, same as what we did in Ubuntu. So from this point forth, basically everything is the same as what we did in Ubuntu. And yeah, so that really that helps you set up your Debian-based servers. So in other words, Debian-based meaning Ubuntu as well, because Ubuntu is derived from Debian. And you will have a very secure server on both Debian or Ubuntu. If I could give you some recommendation here, if this is the first time you ever install a Linux server, and it's not just a very small server, for instance, just for running Nextcloud, but maybe you're going to be running multiple services on it, and you don't want to reinstall your server in 6 months' time or a year's time when you sort of really know what's going on in Linux far better, then my recommendation is to install Ubuntu rather than Debian. Many of the utilities you're going to need are already installed in Ubuntu. On Debian, you might not have them. Like for instance, Sudo itself was not installed on Debian here, and I had to install it. So it'll be a little bit easier for you to get into using Ubuntu server than Debian. But good luck, both of them are rock solid. Ubuntu is a super favorite with many administrators, and so is Debian. And well, good luck to you and enjoy. See you next time. Bye.